Long ago, in the heart of the great savannah, a village called Ujamaa flourished at the base of an ancient baobab tree. The people of Ujamaa lived in harmony with nature, for they believed that the spirits of the land, the sky, and the water watched over them. This tree was no ordinary tree. It was said that the spirit spoke through its mighty branches, and every season, the village gathered beneath it to hear the wisdom it had to share. One such gathering marked the beginning of our story. The village elder, a wise woman named Nyasha, stood beneath the great baobab. Her wrinkled hands reached out to touch the rough bark of the tree, her eyes closed as if in deep communion with the spirits. The villagers, men, women, and children, sat in a wide circle around her, their faces lit by the soft glow of the evening fire. Tonight, something felt different. The wind whispered in an unusual way, and even the birds seemed to quiet in anticipation. Nyasha's voice broke the silence, deep and resonant. "Children of Ujamaa," she began, her voice carrying the weight of many generations, "the spirits have spoken. They have shared with me a vision of darkness, but also of light. A great drought is coming, a time when the rivers will dry, and the lands will crack. The herds will thin, and the crops will wither." But, she paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "Hope lies in the strength of our unity and in the spirit of one among us. A child will rise, born under the full moon, who will have the power to bring life back to the land. This child will speak the language of the earth and sky." Murmurs spread through the crowd. A child. Could it be true? And who would it be? Nyasha raised her hand, quieting the whispers. "This child must be found and protected, for without them, our village may perish." Among the crowd sat a young woman named Julia, her eyes wide with wonder. Unknown to the others, she carried within her a secret. She was with child, and the full moon was only days away. She glanced at her husband, Baraka, who sat beside her, their hands instinctively intertwining. Was their child the one the prophecy spoke of? As the villagers returned to their homes, the seed of the prophecy planted itself deeply in Julia's heart. She could not know then that her unborn child would grow to become Kejoni, a boy destined to face not only the trials of nature but the test of his own spirit and the world around him. Julia's labor began on the night of the full moon, just as Nyasha had foretold. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the village midwives gathered in her hut, preparing for the birth of a child who carried the hope of their people. Baraka stood outside, pacing beneath the light of the great baobab, his heart pounding as he waited. Inside, Julia gripped the hand of the eldest midwife, Maisha, whose face bore the calm of many such nights. "Breathe, child," Maisha whispered, "for this is the way of life, the way of mothers before you and the way of mothers after you." As the night wore on, the sound of Julia's cries mixed with the rustling of the baobab's leaves, as if the tree itself was joining in her labor. And then, as the moon reached its highest point in the sky, the cries of a newborn filled the air. "A boy," Maisha announced, her eyes wide with awe. "A strong boy." Julia, exhausted but smiling, cradled her son in her arms. His skin was the color of the earth after rain, and his eyes, though new to the world, seemed ancient and wise. Baraka rushed inside, his heart swelling as he knelt beside Julia, gazing at their son. "What shall we name him?" Baraka asked. Julia looked down at the tiny face in her arms. "Kejoni," she said softly. "For he will bring life back to the land, just as the rains turn the earth green once more." Outside, the baobab's leaves rustled gently in the breeze, as if blessing the child's name. Kejoni grew quickly, and it was soon clear that he was no ordinary child. From an early age, he had a way with animals that astounded the villagers. Birds would land on his shoulders as he walked, whispering their songs into his ear. The goats followed him as though he were one of their own, and even the wild antelope in the plains did not flee from his presence. But the true test of his connection with nature came on the day he turned 5. It was the dry season, and the village had not seen rain for months. The crops were withering, and the river that flowed through Ujima had dwindled to a mere trickle. The villagers, though strong, were beginning to fear that Nyasha's prophecy was coming to pass. They had all but given up hope when Kejoni, who had been playing by the riverbank, suddenly stood still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Without a word, the boy began to walk toward the center of the village. The villagers, curious, followed him. Kejoni stopped beneath the great baobab tree, his tiny hands resting on its trunk. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, all was still. Then, without warning, a single raindrop fell. It landed on Kejoni's cheek, rolling down his face like a tear. The villagers gasped, looking up at the sky. More drops followed, light at first but then heavier, until a steady rain began to fall. The parched earth drank eagerly, the dust transforming into dark, rich soil before their eyes. The villagers fell to their knees in awe, realizing that the prophecy was true. Kejoni had the power to bring life back to the land. Nyasha watched from the doorway of her hut, her old eyes twinkling with a mixture of pride and caution. He is still young, she murmured to herself, but the spirits have chosen wisely. The path before him will not be easy, but he will grow strong, just as the baobab grows tall. And so, the rains returned to Ujima, and with them, hope. But this was only the beginning of Kejoni's journey, for the drought was not the only trial he would face. Darkness was still lurking in the distance, and Kejoni would need more than the gift of nature to overcome it. He would need the strength of his people, the wisdom of the ancients, and the courage of his own heart. As Kejoni grew, the village of Ujima flourished under his quiet yet powerful influence. The rains returned more frequently, the crops thrived, and the animals that once roamed far from the village began grazing closer. Kejoni's connection to nature deepened, and though he was still young, his presence brought comfort to the villagers. However, Kejoni was not like the other children. While they played and laughed in the fields, Kejoni spent his time listening to the earth, the trees, and the wind. He was drawn to the great baobab tree more than any other place, often sitting beneath its branches in deep thought. The villagers began to notice how the wind seemed to whisper around him, as if speaking a language only he could understand. One evening, as the sun sank low in the sky, Kejoni sat alone beneath the baobab. The wind began to stir, its soft hum growing louder. He closed his eyes and listened, the way Nyasha had taught him. The wind carried stories, ancient and forgotten, and Kejoni had learned to understand their meaning. Tonight, however, the whispers were different, sharper, more urgent. The wind seemed to be calling him, pulling him toward the unknown. Kejoni, it seemed to say, the time is near. Darkness comes. Kejoni opened his eyes, his heart pounding. The wind's message sent a chill down his spine, even as the evening air remained warm. He looked around, but no one was nearby. He felt alone, but he knew the spirits were trying to reach him. Kejoni, a voice called out, breaking him from his trance. It was his mother, Julia, standing at the edge of the clearing. It's time to come home, my son. The night is falling. He hesitated, looking up at the swaying branches of the baobab. The tree seemed to whisper in agreement with the wind. Something was coming, something darker than the drought they had survived. That night, Kejoni lay awake in his hut, the words of the wind replaying in his mind. He turned to his father, Baraka, who was busy sharpening his hunting spear by the fire. "Father," Kejoni began, his voice soft, "do you believe in the spirits of the wind?" Baraka chuckled, his broad shoulders shaking as he set down his spear. "Of course, my son. The wind, the earth, the water, they all carry the voice of the ancestors. Why do you ask?" Kejoni paused, unsure of how to explain the feeling that had settled in his chest. "I think the wind is warning me. I heard it tonight, and it spoke of something dark." Baraka's smile faded as he studied his son's face. "What do you mean?" I don't know, Kejoni admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. But it felt real. Like something is coming, and I have to be ready. Baraka placed a hand on Kejoni's shoulder, his expression softening. You carry the weight of the spirits, Kejoni. But you are still young. Whatever is coming, we will face it together, as a family, as a village. You are not alone. Kejoni nodded, though the unease in his heart did not lift. His father's words were comforting, but the whispers of the wind were louder now, and he knew they spoke the truth. The next morning, the village was abuzz with excitement as the annual gathering of elders approached. Every year, elders from nearby villages came to Ujamaa to discuss the welfare of their people and to share the wisdom passed down through generations. It was a time of great celebration, with dances, feasts, and storytelling around the fire. But this year, there was a different air around the village. The elders spoke in hushed tones, their faces lined with worry. Nyasha, the village's elder, had summoned them for more than just tradition. As Kejoni watched the preparations from his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that the gathering had something to do with the message he'd received from the wind. His mother had noticed his unease and had suggested he spend time with Nyasha. Go see her, Julia said, her gentle hands on Kejoni's shoulders. She may help you understand what the spirits are telling you. Reluctantly, Kejoni walked to Nyasha's hut. The elder was sitting outside, her wise eyes gazing toward the horizon as if she could see what others could not. She smiled as Kejoni approached. I've been expecting you, she said, her voice calm as a river in the early morning. Sit, my child. Kejoni sat on the ground beside her, the familiar scent of herbs and wood smoke filling his senses. Tell me what troubles you, Nyasha asked, her voice kind but firm. Kejoni hesitated but then relayed the strange experience he had the night before, the wind's warning, the sense of an approaching darkness. Nyasha listened carefully, her face unreadable. When Kejoni finished, she was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. The spirits often speak through the elements, Nyasha began. But they rarely give warnings unless the danger is grave. What you heard is not to be taken lightly. I, too, have sensed a change in the winds. The balance of the earth and sky is shifting, and something threatens to break that balance. Kejoni's heart raced. What can I do? I'm just a boy. Nyasha smiled softly, her eyes twinkling. You may be young, Kejoni, but the spirits have chosen you for a reason. You carry the gift of the earth in your soul. And you are not alone. The village, your family, even the spirits themselves will guide you. But the journey ahead will be difficult, and you must be prepared. Kejoni swallowed hard, his thoughts swirling. What should I do? Listen, Nyasha said simply. Listen to the wind, the trees, the animals. They will show you the way. That night, as the village gathered around the fire for the elders' meeting, Kejoni stayed by the baobab tree, listening once more to the whispering winds. He could feel it now, clearer than before, a darkness lurking in the distance, growing closer with each passing day. And he knew that soon, the village would need him more than ever. The days that followed the elders' gathering were tense. Though no one spoke of it openly, the feeling of something impending hung heavy over the village. The winds grew stronger, carrying with them the scent of the distant forest, a place the villagers seldom ventured. Kejoni's unease deepened as the whispers of the wind became more frequent, more urgent. One afternoon, while Kejoni was fetching water from the river, he noticed something strange. The animals, which usually roamed freely and without fear, were on edge. Birds flew in erratic patterns, and the goats huddled together, as if sensing a predator nearby. Even the usually playful monkeys stayed hidden in the treetops, their chittering unusually quiet. Kejoni looked toward the edge of the forest, where the thick trees stood like silent sentinels. A shadow seemed to flicker just beyond the tree line, moving too quickly for his eyes to follow. He felt a chill run down his spine. Without thinking, Kejoni set down his water jug and began walking toward the forest. The wind picked up, tugging at his clothes, as if trying to pull him back. But Kejoni was drawn to the shadow, his curiosity stronger than his fear. As he neared the trees, he saw it again, a dark shape moving through the underbrush. It was unlike any animal he had ever seen, large and fast, with eyes that gleamed in the fading sunlight. Suddenly, the wind howled in his ears, louder than ever before. "Do not go further, Kejoni," it seemed to scream. Startled, Kejoni stopped in his tracks. His heart raced, and his legs felt heavy as if rooted to the ground. He could feel the presence of something dark, something wrong, just beyond the trees. He turned and ran back toward the village, his feet pounding against the earth. Whatever was lurking in the forest, he knew it wasn't something he could face alone. By the time he reached the village, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the huts. His mother, Julia, was waiting for him, her face filled with worry. "Kejoni, where have you been?" she asked, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Kejoni caught his breath, glancing back toward the forest. "There's something in the woods, Mama," he said, his voice trembling. "Something dark." Julia's face paled. "The spirits have spoken of a shadow," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We must speak with Nyasha." And so, Kejoni and his mother went to the elder's hut once more, the weight of the darkness pressing on their hearts. The winds had warned them, and Kejoni now understood, whatever was coming was not just a threat to him, but to all of Ujamaa. The shadow at the edge of the forest was only the beginning. That evening, the village of Ujamaa gathered once again by the fire, their faces lit by the glow of the flames and the tension in the air. Word of Kejoni's sighting at the edge of the forest had spread quickly, and though few spoke of it openly, a sense of dread weighed heavily on the village. The elders, including Nyasha, sat in a circle, their expressions grave. As the fire crackled and the stars glittered above, Nyasha rose to speak. "The spirits have warned us through the wind, through the animals, and now through the eyes of Kejoni," she began, her voice low but firm. "A darkness stirs in the forest, a shadow that threatens the balance of our world. We must be vigilant, for the time to act is near." The villagers murmured among themselves, exchanging fearful glances. Kejoni, sitting beside his mother and father, felt the weight of their eyes upon him. He had never felt so small, so uncertain. The shadow in the forest haunted his thoughts, and though the village looked to him for answers, he had none to give. "What can we do, Elder Nyasha?" a voice called from the crowd. "How can we fight something we cannot see?" Nyasha raised her hands for silence. "The spirits have chosen a path for us. This shadow is not like any enemy we have faced before, it is born from imbalance, from something that has been disturbed in the natural order. The first step is to understand where this darkness comes from." Kejoni's heart raced. He knew, deep down, that he had a role to play in this. But how could a child face such a force? He glanced at the towering baobab tree, its branches swaying gently in the breeze as if trying to comfort him. Nyasha turned her gaze to Kejoni, her eyes filled with both kindness and expectation. "Kejoni, the spirits have spoken to you. You have heard the wind, felt the earth. Now you must listen to them again. They will show you the way." Kejoni swallowed hard, nodding slowly. He didn't know what to say, but Nyasha's faith in him gave him strength. That night, as the villagers dispersed, Kejoni stayed by the baobab tree, staring into the flickering flames of the dying fire. Suddenly, the rhythmic beating of drums filled the air, a sound that echoed through the village and the surrounding plains. Kejoni looked up, startled. The drums were coming from the direction of the forest. The villagers gathered once again, fear in their eyes as the ominous sound grew louder. It was not the joyful beat of celebration or the steady rhythm of a hunt, it was something darker, more foreboding. Baraka gripped his spear tightly, his muscles tensing as he prepared for whatever might come. "Stay here," he instructed Julia, who held Kejoni close. "I will go with the others to see what this is." A group of warriors from the village, led by Baraka, ventured toward the edge of the forest, their spears and bows ready. Kejoni watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. Something deep within him told him that the drums were not merely a sign of danger, they were a call, a challenge from the darkness that lurked in the trees. As the warriors disappeared into the night, Kejoni closed his eyes and listened. The wind whispered through the village, but this time it was not a warning, it was a song, soft and distant, like the voice of the land itself. It spoke of resilience, of the earth's power to heal, and of a force greater than the shadow that threatened them. Kejoni's eyes snapped open, and for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. He could no longer stand by and wait for the village to protect him. The spirits had chosen him for a reason, and it was time to embrace his destiny. He rose to his feet, the wind swirling around him like an old friend. Without a word, he began walking toward the forest, his steps sure and steady. The drums continued to beat, growing louder as he neared the trees. Behind him, his mother called out, but Kejoni didn't stop. He knew this was his path, and no one could walk it for him. The forest loomed before Kejoni, its tall trees casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like the fingers of some unseen creature. The drums echoed from deep within, their rhythm pulling him forward as if they were calling his name. Kejoni's feet moved on their own, carrying him over the boundary between the village and the wilderness beyond. The moment he crossed into the forest, the air grew cooler, heavier. The familiar warmth of the village fire was replaced by the crisp scent of damp earth and ancient trees. The world felt different here, as if the rules of nature shifted the deeper one ventured. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept moving, his eyes scanning the undergrowth for signs of the shadow he had seen. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made him flinch, but he pushed forward. Suddenly, the drums stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Kejoni paused, his breath catching in his throat. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath as well, as if the very trees were waiting for what came next. And then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was not a creature, as Kejoni had feared, but a man. He was tall and thin, with skin as dark as night and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. His clothes were tattered, made of leaves and vines, and he carried a staff twisted from the branches of the forest. Kejoni's first instinct was to run, but something about the man's presence held him in place. He could feel the power radiating from him, a force both ancient and wild. "Who are you?" Kejoni asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound brave. The man smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "I am a messenger," he said, his voice deep and smooth, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "I have come to warn you, Kejoni of Ujimo. The balance of this land is tipping, and soon, it will fall into darkness." Kejoni felt a chill run through him. "What do you mean? What is happening?" The man's eyes gleamed. "The shadow you saw is only a part of it. There are forces at work far older and more dangerous than you can imagine. The spirits of the land are stirring, and they are angry. If the balance is not restored, this forest, and your village, will fall." Kejoni clenched his fist, his fear giving way to determination. "How can we stop it?" The man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "The answer lies within you, Kejoni. You carry the gift of the earth, the power to heal and restore what has been broken. But you are not yet ready to face what is coming. You must learn, grow, and understand the true nature of your connection to the spirits." Kejoni swallowed hard. "What must I do?" The man raised his staff, pointing deeper into the forest. "There is a place, hidden deep within the heart of this land, where the spirits of the earth dwell. It is there that you will find the knowledge you seek. But be warned, the journey will be perilous, and not all who seek the spirit's return. Kejoni hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of his family, his village, the people who were counting on him. Could he truly leave them behind to embark on this dangerous quest? Before he could answer, the man stepped back, melting into the shadows once more. Remember, the voice echoed through the trees, the forest will test you, but the earth will guide you. Trust in the spirits, and you will find your way. Kejoni stood there for a long moment, the weight of the man's words sinking in. He knew now that his journey had only just begun. The forest awaited him, full of secrets and dangers, but also the key to saving his home. Taking a deep breath, Kejoni turned and began walking deeper into the woods, the sound of the drum still echoing faintly in the distance. The deeper Kejoni ventured into the forest, the more he could feel its ancient presence surrounding him. The trees here were taller than any he had ever seen, their branches reaching high into the sky, their roots twisting and curling beneath his feet like the veins of the earth itself. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and rich soil, and the sounds of the forest, birdsong, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, seemed to fade the further he walked. It was as if the forest itself was watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. For hours, Kejoni pressed on, his legs growing tired, but his resolve never wavering. The man's words echoed in his mind, the forest will test you, but the earth will guide you. He knew that whatever lay ahead, he would have to trust in the spirits and in himself. As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, Kejoni came upon a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone, its surface covered in moss and ancient carvings. The markings glowed faintly in the fading light, and Kejoni felt a shuddering storm. As Kejoni emerged from the cave, he sensed a change in the air. The wind, which had been guiding him gently until now, grew stronger and colder. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, swirling ominously. The sky had darkened, and a deep rumble echoed through the trees, a distant promise of an approaching storm. The forest felt alive with anticipation. The birds had fallen silent, and the usual rustling of leaves was absent, replaced by the low murmur of the wind, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Kejoni knew that the moment he had been preparing for was drawing near. The shadow he had seen before, the one that had threatened his village and spread fear throughout the land, was close. The storm was not just a natural event, it was a reflection of the turmoil in the hearts of his people and the imbalance in the earth. The drought will end, Kejoni continued, his voice clear and confident. The land will heal, but only if we remember that we are a part of it. We need to work together, to honor the earth, the wind, and the water, just as our ancestors did. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, one of the elders, a woman named Amina, stepped forward. She had always been one of the village's wisest voices, respected by all. Kejoni speaks the truth, Amina said, her voice steady and strong. We have forgotten our ways. We've allowed fear to blind us, to make us forget the connection we have with the land. But it is not too late. If the spirits have guided Kejoni, then we must listen. The crowd murmured again, this time with less doubt and more curiosity. Kejoni could see the shift happening, slow but sure. His people were beginning to see that the answers they sought weren't just in the physical world, they were in their hearts, in their unity, and in their connection to the land. The days following Kejoni's return were filled with action. The villagers, inspired by his journey, began working together to restore balance to their land. They gathered to repair the dried-out irrigation systems, planted new seeds in the fields, and began to speak to the earth once more, offering thanks and asking for its forgiveness. Kejoni could feel the energy in the village changing. Where there had once been tension and fear, there was now a quiet hopefulness. People smiled more easily, and laughter could be heard again as children played in the square. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual shift, a renewal of the village's spirit. One afternoon, as Kejoni was helping to tend a patch of land near the riverbank, he felt the wind pick up. He paused, wiping his brow, and looked up at the sky. The clouds had gathered again, but this time they were different, softer, fuller, carrying the weight of something long awaited. A drop of water fell on his cheek. Kejoni froze, staring at the sky. Another drop, then another. Around him, the other villagers began to notice, their faces lifting toward the heavens in disbelief. "It's raining," someone whispered, and the word spread through the crowd like wildfire. Soon, the soft drizzle turned into a steady downpour. The people of Ujamaa stood in the rain, laughing and crying at the same time, their arms outstretched as if they were welcoming an old friend. The dry, cracked earth drank deeply, and Kejoni could feel the land sigh with relief, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Kejoni stood in the middle of it all, drenched but smiling, as the rain poured down around him. He felt the presence of the spirits, the earth, the wind, and the water, all rejoicing in the restoration of balance. This rain wasn't just a physical relief, it was a symbol of the healing that had begun within the village, within the hearts of its people. The drought had ended, but more than that, the fear that had held them captive for so long was beginning to dissolve, washed away by the rain. Kejoni looked around at his people, their faces lit with joy and hope, and knew that the real change had taken root. With the return of the rains, the village of Ujamaa entered a time of renewal. The fields, once barren and cracked, began to flourish again. The crops that had struggled to grow now sprouted green and vibrant, nourished by the earth's restored balance. The rivers, which had run dry for so long, filled with clear, flowing water, bringing life back to the land. Kejoni walked alongside his family and the other villagers, planting new seeds in the fertile soil. As he walked, he remembered the lessons the spirits had taught him, how the land and the people were connected, how fear and doubt could break that connection, but also how trust and unity could restore it. The elders began to gather the village's children to teach them the old stories once more, the stories of their ancestors, of the spirits of the land, of the balance between all living things. Kejoni often sat with them, sharing what he had learned on his journey, telling the children about the shadow and how it had been defeated not by strength alone, but by faith and connection. One day, as Kejoni and his father walked in the field, planting the last of the new crops, his father paused and looked at him. "You've grown, Kejoni," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "You've brought us back from the edge. The village wouldn't be where it is now without you." Kejoni shook his head, smiling modestly. "It wasn't just me, Baba. The village needed to remember its strength, and the earth helped guide me. I only did what I had to do." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than that. You've shown us that no matter how dark things seem, there's always light if we remember who we are and where we come from. You've reminded us of that." Kejoni looked out at the fields, the lush green stretching toward the horizon, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought him, and his people, back to their roots. As the seasons passed, the village of Ujamaa continued to thrive. The rains came regularly now, and the land remained fertile. The fear and doubt that had once plagued the villagers were gone, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and purpose. Kejoni's journey had not only restored balance to the land, but it had also strengthened the bonds between the people and their home. But Kejoni knew that the work wasn't finished. The shadow might have been defeated, but the lesson of balance was one that needed constant tending, like the crops they planted. The village would need to continue honoring the earth, the spirits, and each other if they were to maintain the harmony they had fought so hard to reclaim. The elders of the village, led by Amina, began organizing regular gatherings to honor the spirits of the land. These ceremonies, held under the full moon or at the change of seasons, were filled with music, dance, and storytelling, reminding the people of their connection to the earth and to one another. Kejoni often stood at the edge of these gatherings, watching as the villagers danced and sang. Around the fire, their faces lit by its warm glow. The sound of drums echoed through the night, a heartbeat that pulsed with life, with the spirit of unity that now thrived in Ujemo. The once quiet village was now filled with joy and laughter, as the people celebrated not just their survival, but the newfound harmony they had created with the land and with one another. Kejoni felt a sense of pride and peace as he watched. He had helped guide his people back to their roots, but they had done the rest. They had embraced the lessons of the spirits, and in doing so, had not only healed the land, but had also healed themselves. One night, after a particularly vibrant celebration, Amina approached Kejoni as he stood gazing up at the stars. The old woman's eyes sparkled with wisdom, her weathered hands clasping her staff. "You have become more than just a boy, Kejoni," Amina said, her voice soft but filled with strength. "You have become a keeper of our traditions, a bridge between the past and the future. The spirits chose well when they guided you." Kejoni looked down, humble in the presence of such praise. "I only did what was needed," he replied. "The spirits spoke to me, but it was the village that did the hard work of healing." Amina nodded. "True, but every journey needs a guide. You have led us through the darkness and into the light. The village is stronger now because of you." Kejoni felt the weight of her words, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. He had been given the gift of understanding, a connection to the land that was deeper than most. And now, it was his duty to ensure that this balance was preserved for future generations. "I'll continue to honor the spirits," Kejoni said, determination in his voice. "I'll make sure we never forget our connection to the earth." Amina smiled, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. "I know you will, child. And the village will follow your example." Over the following months, Kejoni's role in the village grew. He was no longer just a boy, he had become a leader, a guardian of the land's wisdom. The people came to him for guidance, not just in matters of the earth, but in the spiritual and emotional struggles that occasionally arose. Kejoni took these new responsibilities seriously, but he never allowed himself to forget the lessons he had learned on his journey. He spent hours each day walking through the forest, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, listening to the wind, and sitting by the rivers that now flowed freely through the land. He maintained his connection with the spirits, always mindful of the balance that needed to be upheld. The children of the village followed him on many of these walks, eager to learn from him. Kejoni shared the stories he had been told by the spirits and taught the children to listen to the land, to feel the energy that flowed through every tree, every stone, and every drop of water. The children, filled with wonder, embraced these teachings with open hearts, and Kejoni knew that the future of the village was in good hands. One day, as Kejoni sat by the river with a group of children, his younger brother, Jumo, tugged at his sleeve. Jumo had grown more confident since Kejoni's return, no longer the timid boy he had once been. "Kejoni," Jumo said, his eyes wide with curiosity, "do you think the shadow will ever come back?" Kejoni looked out over the river, considering his brother's question carefully. "The shadow was born from our fear, from the doubt we allowed to grow inside us," he explained. "As long as we remember who we are and stay connected to the earth, the shadow won't have any power over us. But if we forget, if we let fear take root again, it could return." Jumo frowned, his young face thoughtful. "Then we have to make sure we never forget." Kejoni smiled, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Exactly, Jumo. That's why it's important to keep telling the stories, to keep honoring the spirits, and to always work together as a community. As long as we do that, the shadow can't harm us." Jumo nodded, determined. "I remember." Kejoni looked at the other children gathered around, all of them listening intently. "We are all guardians of the earth," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. It's not just one person's job, it's something we all share. The earth gives us life, and we have to protect it in return. The children nodded, their young faces serious. Kejoni knew that they understood, even if they didn't fully grasp the weight of what he was saying. But they would grow into it, just as he had. Years passed, and the village of Ujemo continued to thrive. The fields remained fertile, the rivers flowed strong, and the people lived in harmony with the land. The shadow that had once haunted them was now a distant memory, a story told around the fire to remind the young of the importance of balance. Kejoni grew into a man, respected and loved by his people. He never sought power or glory, but his wisdom and connection to the spirits made him a natural leader. Under his guidance, Ujemo became not just a village but a beacon of hope, a place where other communities came to learn the old ways, to remember the importance of living in harmony with the earth. The children who had once followed Kejoni on his walks through the forest had grown into adults themselves, and they carried on his teachings with the same reverence and care. They became the new storytellers, the new keepers of the land's wisdom, ensuring that the lessons of the past would never be forgotten. As Kejoni stood at the edge of the village one evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, he felt a deep sense of peace. The journey he had begun so many years ago, when he was just a boy, had brought him full circle. He had faced the shadow, learned the secrets of the earth, and helped his people heal. But more than that, he had ensured that the light, the spirit of unity, of resilience, and of connection, would continue to shine for generations to come. The wind whispered through the trees, soft and gentle, carrying with it the voices of the spirits. Kejoni closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that his journey was far from over, but that the path ahead was clear. He was a guardian of the earth, a keeper of the light, and his people would never forget the lessons he had helped them learn. And so, the village of Ujemo flourished, a place where the earth and its people lived in harmony, a legacy of light that would endure for all time.